Hi guys, it's Nicole, and today I have a process video using the May sketch and class content from the Allison Davis sketch class over at SCT Magazine. I found myself gravitating towards one of the sketch options that used a ton of very small pieces of pattern paper. I'm not surprised because I do enjoy the end results of those layouts, but I sometimes struggle to get things lined up, and it can be a much lengthier process when you've got all those little pieces and there's a ton of stitching. But like I said, I love the end result of those. So I am going to be doing Valentine's Day of 2023, and for Valentine's Day we tend to keep things pretty simple. I just kind of give my kids a little gift bag with some treats, usually the next book in whatever series that they're reading, that kind of thing. And when I was pulling product, I was not loving the color combinations of the love themed collections that I have. And I had even looked online to see what had come out recently from like Doodlebug and Simple Stories and Bella Boulevard, and I wasn't seeing anything that I absolutely loved. So I did what I tend to do is I will just pull out a ridiculous amount of paper. I pull out things that are themed to whatever theme I'm working with. So love, Valentine's Day. I will pull out my big bag of scraps, which I've got here. I will pull out my go-to B-sides from like Doodlebug or Bella Boulevard or Simple Stories, and kind of come up with my own color palette. And I've said this before, pattern paper is probably my favorite supply. It's my favorite step in the process. However, I think it takes me the longest because I can be so indecisive, but it's one of those things that I know if I can find a set of patterns and colors that makes my brain happy, the whole rest of the process will be enjoyable for me, I guess I would say. So I just start auditioning patterns, and I like to line them up like this because in this instance I'm going to be cutting them into squares and then into triangles, and they're going to be butted up against each other. So I really want to see like what they look like together. If I can find a busier pattern or what would consider to be an A-side pattern with all of the colors that I'm thinking of using, I do try to include that. However, I know that whatever random color palette is in my brain is not necessarily going to be on one of these papers, and it's okay if I'm missing a color, if there's an extra color. Like, I'm pretty sure I used this plaid and there might be like a brown in there, but I didn't pick a brown or like a dark red pattern paper. Like I said, I go with the ones that I really like, and then I fill in with what's my go-to, which is going to be the petite prints from Doodlebug. The linen one is my absolute favorite. I'm trying to embrace more of like the florals and the polka dots, but I don't think I used them today. I went with like the linens, the plaids, the stripes, I'm pretty sure. I don't know, there's something about B-sides. To me, they look good. At this point, I could not decide between those two like peachy coral papers. So my go-to is to take a picture, send it to a friend, and ask them. A lot of times, even just myself looking at a photo of it kind of helps me figure out which one looks better. A lot of times, if I'm in a 20-minute session of just looking at paper, my brain just can't make another decision. And so sometimes I will ask somebody else to make that decision for me, and it works out. Now, if I am going to be cutting like a repetitive shape, like a square, a strip, something like that, and I need them to all be as close to the exact size as possible, I will take a strip of chipboard, cardstock, something straight, and temporarily attach it to my trimmer. This is basically creating like a stopper so that I don't have to visually line it up at I want to say I probably did 1.5 or 1 3/4. I can't read it on here. to make my squares. If I left it up to me visually lining it up, none of them would be the same. So this is just a way for me to make sure that my strip starts off the same width, and then when I rotate the paper and I make it a square, it's going to be the same. Now, when I go to cut these into triangles, that's 100% going to be up to my eyeballs and a trimmer, and they're not all going to be perfect, but I do try to set myself up for as much possible success as I possibly can with tricks like this. And I will sometimes forget to remove this from my trimmer for a little bit. And so if you ever see something like this glued to my trimmer in a video, I get asked about it a lot. 9 times out of 10, it's from something like this, and I just forgot to take it off, because the paper will still slide over it, no problem, and I can keep cutting. A lot of times I don't pay. It's like I've cut so much paper on it that I don't see it anymore. So I don't automatically think to take it off, and I won't take it off until I'm completely done with the layout, in case I need to go back and add more. And in this case I did. I think I had to cut some more of the heart pattern because I wasn't paying attention when I made my triangles. So at this point, I have all of my squares cut out. I like to look at them and kind of figure out, do I need another pattern? I know that some of my triangles are going to be open space to the background with some stitching, so that technically kind of counts as a 7th. So at this point I was okay with how many I had, and I just kind of figured, well, if it's not looking like enough mix, I'll just flip over some of the B-sides and use the other pattern. The easiest way for me to cut these, and I apologize, I'm out of frame, I've said this before, I tend to work closer towards my body on my desk and not away from like my chest. So sometimes I don't realize when I've scooted my trimmer closer and closer to me, but I just line it up on the metal edge of like a guillotine trimmer and cut it that way. However, I should have paid a little bit of attention on, I think the heart pattern is the only one I had where the pattern direction kind of mattered. I would have liked it better if when I was cutting it, if I had made sure that I cut like half of them with the triangle going one way and half with the angle going the other way. Now, this is the part that I love to hate, I guess I'll say. Again, I like playing with papers. I love all the different patterns. I don't naturally have like a good random rhythm to things, so I will just sit here and kind of play around. I will kind of get going on a good mix. At this point I was making sure that my wood grain, so I guess I have 2 patterns. The heart and the wood grain were the ones that it kind of mattered which direction that they were going. Everything else, it didn't really matter. And I don't have like a good way of explaining when the random pattern looks good to me. It just either does or it doesn't. I think I just try to have the different colors kind of spread out. I try to have different pairings. So you know how you have like the 2 triangles that make up the square. I try to make sure that every time I have a wood grain, I'm not always pairing it with like the coral, or I'm not always pairing it with the plaid. I also, at this point, I think I was trying to make sure that I was following the direction on the sketch. The sketch did the work for me when it came to figuring out which angles the triangles needed to face. I would say probably 80% of the way through, I sort of forgot that that was happening, and I started just putting stuff down. In the end, it's fine. It looks great. I just know that my brain likes it when somebody else has sort of already curated that part of the randomness of which way do the triangles go. So again, I think this took me a ridiculous amount of time. I'm pretty sure I stopped filming at this point. I used some washi tape around the edge to give myself the same amount of exterior margin and try to have all of the outside edge pieces be as straight as possible. even with that, some of my triangles didn't line up super great, and it's fine. I just kind of tried to keep those areas closer to where like my photos and my embellishments are going to be. That's going to create a better chance of me being able to hide stuff like that. And then I started the very lengthy process of poking out all of these holes. I don't think it was quite as much as, say, every other triangle. I would say it was probably maybe a third of the triangles got stitched. This took me a while, but again, I enjoy the stitching process. A lot of times I don't find myself watching TV until I have something like this where I can just kind of listen. So I will pull up a show that I'm in the middle of. So like I think I'm in the middle of Castle, or 24 is like my go-to rewatch. It's stuff that I don't have to visually look at, but I can just kind of listen and follow along. And even when I thought I was done and I had brought this back upstairs, I found that there was a couple that I forgot to do. So I went ahead and filmed. I think I stitched just this one to show you guys that it doesn't take very long to do one of these triangles. And then when I was done with the stitching, I went through and made sure that all of the ones that didn't have stitching were glued down really well. When I originally put all of these down, I just did a really small swipe of ATG adhesive in the middle, because at that point I wasn't sure which ones were going to be stitched and which ones were just going to be flat to the page. And I wanted to make sure that when I got to the point that I'm piercing the holes and stitching, I'm not fighting through that adhesive. So that's just the method that works for me. So, and I'm sure you could see the big hole in the middle. I don't put stuff behind the photos and stitch behind the stuff that the photos are going to cover up. That's just too much time, too much labor. Nobody will ever see it. So I do make sure to mark off where my photos are going to be, and I leave that blank, and then all of this is going to cover it up. So I picked through that die cut pack and just kind of grabbed things that didn't necessarily match but didn't clash. So I stuck with a lot of the like black and neutral things, and then like a couple that were more heavy on the lip theme. I pulled out my favorite Lawn Fawn heart set. I have 2 of these. If I can find it, I will link it. This is a super old set, but it is my absolute favorite heart shape. That's why I have 2 sets. I like to do the 3 layers of white cardstock and then the top layer of pattern paper. And whenever I make these, I tend to make some extras. I keep the white blanks in a little container so that days like this where I want a handful of hearts, I don't have to do them start to finish completely, like all the white layers. So I was able to go through and pull out the sizes that I needed with like the blank bases, and then just cut the top layers. So what I did was I laid the hearts on my layout and kind of figured out what sizes that I wanted and just set them out as the white hearts. And then wherever they were sitting on my layout was kind of how I determined what color I felt like was either missing from that area or would contrast well and you would be able to see it. I didn't want to have like a blue heart trying to compete against a blue triangle behind it. Like you wouldn't see it. So that was kind of how I decided on what pattern was going to be on the top layer. And I did try to use a lot of the extra like triangle pieces that I had instead of cutting new paper. So again, I'm just going to go and add the top layer to my hearts. I liked this layout specifically because I tend to use I would say the 3 smallest sizes the most, and this was a good layout to use the larger sizes on, and I had a bunch of the blanks like ready to go. When I do a layout that has a ton of different little pieces and a ton of stitching, I like to keep like the photos, the title, the embellishments, the journaling. I like to keep that a little bit more simple so that everything's not competing with each other, and you can really kind of have the background hold its own and be interesting on its own, and then everything else is just kind of just a little bit of seasoning, not a lot. So I've heard people say that they could never go through this process. I don't know, something about the tedious and the repetitive stuff I really enjoy. So to each their own. The phrase over here is you do you and I'll do me. And sometimes that means doing things like this. So I think I ended up I'm pretty sure I made more hearts than what I actually needed, but that's the benefit of using a lot of B-sides is the stuff that I didn't use just goes back in the little container, and the next time I pull out this container of hearts, if I can use one that's already made, that's just bonus points. Like, it's already done, the color matches, that's great. I have been known to save very small pieces of like glitter paper, my favorite B-sides, and it's for things like this, to cut out teeny tiny hearts that are going to sort of perfectly complement whatever random specific theme that I have kind of cobbled together. So now that I have all of my decisions made, I can go ahead and start attaching everything. Because my photos are going over a big blank hole in the background, I can just put them down with HTG. I don't know why that was so hard to think of. Just my regular adhesive. I did put foam strips behind the title. I felt like it needed just a little bit of help to kind of stand out. Anytime I use things like those big circle die cuts and I'm going to tuck them, I go ahead and cut them in half because that gives me, you know, a 2-for-1. I can use the other half on another layout, especially knowing that that's something I've already gravitated towards once. I know I'm more likely to probably pull it out again. And I just move things around until I feel like they look okay. And because I've made so many hearts in different colors, I can swap them out if I feel like I was trying to put a different color up at the top and I was like, no, I don't like it. The triangle's too close. Like, it's the most random things, but this is the part that I struggle with. I watch process videos where it seems like people have such like an ease to their clusters, and I feel like I fight mine every single time. Because my journaling is basically just 2 small lines, I don't bother with my sentiment die method. These were actually printed with journaling for another layout. I just went back to the old way that I had cut them for years when it's only like 1 or 2 lines like this. I've done it for so long, it's like muscle memory on where I need to look to line them up. I know you guys say that you struggle with that, and that's why you like the PDF that I made to go with the sentiment die. Sometimes I just get lazy if I'm only doing a little bit of journaling at a time. I think my working through like the dark side process for June, I think I'm gonna try to do all of my journaling at once and do it on the PDF so that I can use the die and save myself a little bit of time. So be on the lookout for that. And this is where everything just sort of comes together. I've made decisions. Even though I've kind of made decisions, I will move things around here and there. And I just fill in around my photos. I like to have my title, journaling, I like to have everything kind of touching each other so that nothing sort of feels like it is floating or off on its own. And I kind of try to work big to small so that towards the end is when I am finding little places to kind of tuck those little tiny hearts. I thought about trying to pull in like some black enamel dots or something like that, and in the end it was just one of those things where you kind of have to just call it done. Like, yes, could I keep adding stuff to this? Of course. I think where my heart and my brain kind of say, okay, enough is enough, I think it's done, is where my personal style is sort of showing itself and saying, it's done for you. This is where we are all going to kind of differ on where our stopping point is and how much we embellish, how we embellish, things like that. That's what makes all these different process videos so interesting to watch, is to see different personal preferences kind of in play. And then instead of stamping the date, I'm just going to go ahead and put the year, and I'm going to pop that up just like the title. A lot of times when it's something like Christmas Day, Halloween, Valentine's Day, 4th of July, something where the holiday is always the same numerical date, I will just go ahead and put the year on there, and then when I go to put it in my album, because it's Valentine's Day, I know it's February 14th, I'm just looking to see which year does this belong to. And with that, my layout is complete, and I will leave you with some detail shots. And as always, I thank you guys for hanging out with me.